Cool.
Great.
So happy Saturday.
Happy Saturday.
We're gonna take some time to walk through portfolio workflows.
Yeah. Very exciting. We'll start out. This will essentially be a continuation of our previous video portfolio preparation workshop, and now we'll really dive into how that works out and how that happens with a step-by-step process.
And I believe we're going to use our previous kind of workflow or kind of diagram of how this goes to guide us through this. And we are going to spend time together, right?
Yeah.
We're going to be in InDesign. We're going to open up our files. We're actually going to see what it looks like to use a tablet. And let's get into it. Dyuthi,
Great.
take us away.
All right. So to get started, this might seem familiar to some of you who watched that video that was released 2 weeks ago. And so this is essentially telling us, what are the different elements of a portfolio, and this can really differ, and you can customize it as well. But this is just a bare bones structural layout of what are the elements in a portfolio. So of course, we all know we start off with the cover page, and then we move on to table of contents, your resume, cover letter in some cases, projects, and then some additional work. And then this is what our process might look like when we're starting off with your portfolio. And like we just discussed last time, it can be difficult to know where to start. So this is where you really want to start your process. You want to first start by gathering your projects. And that essentially means curating your projects based on whether it's an academic portfolio or it's a professional portfolio. So if it's academic, you know that you would have to show every assignment you worked on that semester. If it's a professional portfolio, you would tailor that according to the firm and the kind of work that they do. So let's get started. I am going to quickly just pull up a typical file organization of how you want to just start organizing your projects. So you have, for example, project A, you would have your final presentation boards. Project B, you would have just your images, and this is just to show a variety of different file types that would go into your portfolio. Moving on, when we decide the type of template that we want to use, how does that work? How do you really start doing that? So in this scenario, we're going to go to a slightly more traditional approach, which I'm sure you'll appreciate as well. Let me log in through my iPad and we can start sketching some templates.
And as we get logged in here, I think what's important is that we're not necessarily starting in InDesign or even starting with a template. I think what we're trying to do is sketch out and think about the content we have, right? And just take action, whether that's on a tablet or on a piece of paper or talking to someone about it.
Yeah. Certainly.
There's different strategies to use. We saw that we looked at project A, project B, project C, this kind of gathering of material, right? That works. You also could maybe not gather material and just kind of develop a template, sketch things out, and then find that material later. No matter what, I personally, and Dyuthi, I think you agree, like to gather my material together before I start a project.
Yeah. All right, so I'm just going to share my screen through my iPad and we can walk through sort of a sketching process of how you would lay out your template. All right, I'm using an application called Paper, which you might find useful as well. It's really basic and it kind of takes you through this book format. But anyway, this is not about paper. All All right. So for example, you want to choose 4 main templates that work well. So we would go with, for example, your cover, your resume, table of contents, and your project. So here, you know what elements go into your cover. It would be your name, your semester, if it's an academic portfolio, and maybe a snippet of some of the projects that you've worked on, just to pique the interest of your audience. And then your resume, we all know what goes in there, your name, work experience, and then your skills, but I'm not going to go dive in too much into that. In your table of contents, this is really up to you. You can have your project name here. You can have a central dividing line, and then you can have your page number, for example.
And could you, okay, so you drew that line in the center. What's that about?
So I should have mentioned earlier, this is actually a spread format that we're using. So this is really 2 pages that are spread out. So in this scenario, I'm sorry, I'm a little off track, but the table of contents would not be a spread because you can't really draw a line in the middle of that. I'm just going to take back the spread comment.
No, it's good. I mean, this is an example of thinking through a project, right? What happens if I create a spread, 2 pages, or what happens if I just create a single page?
Right.
And the act of drawing that line that you drew there defines that within your thinking as you sketch out a portfolio.
Right. And yeah, and this is where you might make the, the determination whether you want a particular element to be a spread or just a page, right? Yeah. Moving on to your project template. So in this case, this would most definitely be a spread. So this is your dividing line between the 2 pages. And then this is where you really want to think about all the bare elements that would go into your typical project template. So we would have your title of the project up here, and then you would have some information, possibly your client, some client information, area, square footage, your role as a designer on that project. And then you would have just a text description up here, and then your spotlight image, which would be potentially an axon of your building, something that you really want to highlight. And then that would sort of start the hierarchy of your project elements, right? So on the left, you have all the elements that describe it very briefly, describe the project very briefly, and then you move on to more detailed analysis. So then here you might have your plan, and then your elevations. And then you might have just some render images. So this is just, a basic project template, and this is really up to you to customize. But just, it's really important to think about the hierarchy of where your eye takes you from left to right on a page. And this template sort of really consolidates all of those elements in one spread. So now we're going to take this template that we sketched out, and you can, if you're doing this on a paper, that's great too. You can just scan it and then email it to yourself and use it as a background for the InDesign file we'll be working in. So in this case, I'm just going to send it to my computer.
And as we send that over, right? And we're doing this live, which I actually really appreciate. And I know you're focusing on getting that moved over. I want to come back and comment specifically on the importance of sketching, of taking action outside of a program like InDesign. Now, InDesign is going to give us a different way of thinking about a portfolio. It's going to be much more precise. You're going to realize things like margins, the number of pages, content, resolution, all this kind of stuff. But starting with the act of sketching, thinking, making moves, can be very helpful.
So we're going to start off by creating a brand new document because that's how you start in design file. So here you would typically choose print because eventually you do assume that this portfolio will be printed. And in this scenario, we're going with the spread format. So you would, for example, if it's 11 by 17, you would have that and then just name it. Again, naming is very important. So just call it test portfolio for now.
And naming is important. And naming is also a moment of pause and reflection. When you name something, it gives you a direction, right?
Yes.
This is a test portfolio. This is a portfolio for the BAC, segment 1, segment 2, whatever. This is a portfolio to apply to a firm. This is a portfolio to show my mom, right?
Yes.
But that gives that direction. It's the act of naming something that gives
Right.
us where we might go in the next hour or 2 hours or week.
Very well put. Yeah. So now we have just our basic layout with about 20 pages, which is what we'll assume our portfolio is going to be. And typically what I like to start off with is I just like to, based on the elements that we discussed, which is your cover, resume, table of contents, project, and additional work, we just start labeling your pages just so you have an outline and structure of what goes where. So you can use a different text color just so you have an idea of what it is. And then so just give it a background. And so just that color kind of tells you that this is not a permanent element on the page, and it's just for you to identify at the beginning what goes where.
Can you comment specifically on what tool you're using?
Yes. So this is a really helpful tool, especially when you want to make sure that when you flip through the pages, your elements are in the same exact location. So what I'm doing here is I'm copying this on this page and then right-clicking and paste in place, which keeps it in the same exact location as the previous page. And that saves you the trouble of figuring out how to align things. And this is definitely something we've all done at some point, trying to align it to the page, the previous page, and then figuring out that there's this really great tool. So yeah, that definitely recommend using that tool to align things in the same location.
I mean, we also have to acknowledge that a document of this kind has multiple pages, and the ability to see the same element at the same place on a page is very helpful.
Yes.
And I know right now we're using kind of a tool to lay out our document to establish which pages are which. But yeah, that place in place.
Paste in place. Yeah.
Place in place. Thank you.
Tongue twister. Yeah. Okay, so now we have our layout. We know what goes where. The next step would be to import the sketch that you did previously with all of the elements and dragging that onto our document. So we have our sketch dragged in. I'm actually gonna go straight to the project template so get an idea of that. So now what I'm doing here is I'm just cropping it to the image that I want on the sketch, and then just aligning it to the document. It's a little bit blurry now, so probably best to go with high quality so that you can just see what written, and then you can just lock this in place so it doesn't really bother you.
And I have to comment on the fact that you have specifically aligned the dashed, sketched, spread line. That was what you used to align these things, right?
Yep. That is exactly right.
And it might not be perfect, right? There might be a difference in scale and refinement, resolution, page size, whatever it might be. But here, using that centerfold line gives you a commonality between the work you did on your tablet, in paper, and now in InDesign.
Yep, that is exactly right. And it's very helpful to think that way, you know, in a spread format, and just so you can start to lay out the page. And so now with this background on our file, now we can start to use that as a reference to start inputting these elements finally into the document. So now for the title, you would click on the text tool and then just lay out your title. And so, for example, that's your project name up on the top left corner. And then that's where we had it. And then we're just gonna copy the same. Oops. Copy. Copy the same thing and then just have your project info at the bottom. You can just resize that. And typically what I also like to do is use guidelines, which is this ruler. You can just drag it from the ruler up here on the left corner. You can drag it to your text box that you've created so that you create that you know, alignment between the two elements. And then according to our sketch here, we have a project description on the top left corner. And so you can just assume, since you don't really have that right now, you can assume just text and just assume that that is going to be the extent of your description. Just so, you know, this is just a bare bones structure of your layout.
And let's take a break here because we have the time. Let's zoom in on that text box. Right here, we have this interesting overlay between a sketched box that says text. And then we're using Lorem Ipsum to fill that in. And if you don't mind, can we insert placeholder text real quick?
Sorry.
So let's enter into text mode, double click on all that text, delete it. And now that's a text box, right?
Right.
And then we'll right click and fill with placeholder text.
Wow, that's great. I didn't know that tool existed.
Yeah, it's kind of a newer thing in InDesign. You used to have to go into a Lorem Ipsum generator. And
oh yeah,
if anyone's interested in Lorem Ipsum and the history behind it, please check out some other lectures on it. But it is so important to put text and to visualize the graphics of it. And this does a good job of understanding that text as a layout isn't just boxy. It has so much complexity to it.
Yeah.
So
great.
keep going.
All right. Well, actually, I think it would probably be better to just scale that document so that all right, so another way to do that using the sketch that we previously created would be to resize it proportionally so that it, well, not proportionally in this case, but so that it aligns with the work that you've done. So for example, we've just cropped out all of the other templates, and then we're going to place it. Actually, we're going to align it in the middle with the center line of the spread. And holding down the Alt and Control keys, you can drag it to the extents of the page so you have it aligned with the content. And okay, display performance, high quality, and then you can send it to back and potentially look it as well. And then now you can see that, you know, all of the content that you have is now aligned with the sketch that you created. So this is just another way to check off the box and make sure that everything is aligned. And the same goes with all the other sketches and the templates that we created together.
And it might not, the point here isn't for it to be perfect. I mean, we could adjust it and skew it and make all these changes as needed. I think what we're doing is we're just trying to use what we did before as thinking as a template and comparing that to what we've done in InDesign.
Right, exactly.
And that might be for us something we never show to anyone else, or maybe we showed this sketch to someone and they were like, that is exactly what I want.
Yeah, that could be it too. Yeah.
And so we have a comparison there between the two of them, and we have to do this work where we're saying, okay, here's what we talked about. Here's why it does. Here are why there are inconsistencies. But here is the things that are common between the two different versions.
Right. Yeah, those are great points. Okay, moving on to the spotlight image here. This would also be essentially aligned with your text box. So you want to really start with the corner of that sheet and then line it up with your project info. But in some cases, you might have a much larger image, and that's okay too. But for the purpose of this, we're just going to keep everything aligned. And so just align that one as well. All right. And then moving on, so now we have our brief, which is on the left page of the spread. And moving on to a more detailed part of the project, which is the plans, elevations, renders, and all of those elements. And so we can start laying out using the frame tool, just where we think our plans would go. So you would have your first floor plan, your second floor, and potentially 2 elevations at the bottom. And then you would have potentially have your renders up here. And laying it out using the frame tool really helps you understand, what is the scale and how would your project look like when it's done, and whether you need more space and whether you need to restructure your template. So definitely recommend using that as a starting point. And then, all right, so now we know where things are going to go. What I would also do is, this is just as an added benefit. I would also just, if you like, just name the element so that you know. So
And here again, regardless of what tool we're using, we are naming, identifying, sketching, drawing, making intentional moves to decide what is happening on in this layout, right?
Right. Yes.
And you can use many different methods of doing this. That doesn't matter so much. What does matter is the intention involved in it.
Yes. And in a minute, we can see, how this looks like. Full screen. So you can now see, based on the sketch that we drew out, we were able to generate a brand new template from that, using it as an underlay. And we came up with this really effective template with all of the necessary elements in it. And at least this gives you an idea of, what content your project needs to hold and how that would come across effectively to your audience. All right, so now we can probably get rid of our sketch now that we've made the most use of it. And now this is where we'll start dropping in all of our work, right? And this is following the process of curation that we did with our projects. All right, so we're going to use two different methods to bring in your content. We're first going to try out the drag and drop method, which is really simple, which is what is most recommended. So for example, this is our axon. So we're going to drop in our axon, and then you can potentially just lay it out the way you like. And then you would drop in your images, renders. And this is where you can also use the fitting tool, which is really helpful when you have really large images and you just want to fit them proportionally. So now we have all of our images in. Okay, now we're going to test out placing from a large PDF, for example. When we do have finals and project deadlines, we typically issue just one PDF with all of our content, and it's really helpful to know how you can bring in specific elements from that rather than having to split up the PDF into individual PDFs and then dragging and dropping.
And I want to identify here. Let's go back to the Explorer window or the files window.
Yeah.
And we're looking at our thumbnail versions, right? Here we're not, but this is a PDF.
Yes.
The other projects, Project B, has a collection of JPEGs, maybe PNGs. I don't know what they are exactly. All of them are JPEGs. There is one Adobe PDF document there. With InDesign, we can handle actually all kinds of media formats. And I think the point here is that InDesign gives us the tools to handle those.
Yes.
And to be very specific about how they are formatted and placed into a document. And I believe what you're going to do next is to show us how we can be more advanced of using a multi-page PDF document.
Yes. So this is where your place tool would really come in handy. So if you go to File, Place, so you can even use Control D, which is the shortcut. Click on the file with multiple pages. Click on Show Import Options here, so that will really open up an intermediate window where you can flip through the pages in that document and figure out which ones you're looking for. So, right, if you're going with this image here, preview that. You can even bring in all of them, but we'll just use the first option for now. And then you can also select transparent background if it's an image, or if it's a plan, it would just come in as a transparent background, which is also helpful. And so that is not a plan image, but for the purpose of this exercise. So yeah, I mean, this is a really helpful tool if you have multiple pages in a PDF that you'd like to bring in.
What would happen here? So let's undo two things real quick.
Mhm.
And undo the plan placement. And maybe I've decided that I just want a collection of images here, and they don't have to be plan, elevation, elevation. I'll just let that go, right? If I go to the place command, or if you go to the place command, and then let's do, let's click on range. And I have 4 images. So I could say I want images, what, 3 through 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, 3 through 6.
Yeah.
And now this is interesting, I think. So we'll hit OK. And now it's going to load each of those into my queue, and I place all 4 of those. And then we could drag a selection box around them, select all of those frames, and do the fitting command to fit them. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this essentially just becomes a sheet with images of, yeah.
Look at that. I mean, I think that looks pretty good, right?
It does, yeah. Great. Yeah, no, this is great. I think so. We're very close to having a finished product, finished project template layout. And I guess the last thing that we wanted to just walk through was, if you are looking at post-production and you just like to make some minor tweaks to your file, and you'd like to do that in a different software, Photoshop, for example, you can click on the image, right-click, edit with, and it will give you the options, whether you can do it in InDesign, Photoshop. Click on Photoshop, and it's going to open up. Sorry, let me do that again. It was in the other window. So we click on Photoshop and then edit with. It's going to open up this this window where you can essentially pick the image that you want to edit from that document.
And let's do that 2 different times here, because what's happened is it's opened the PDF.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So a PDF document is a multi-page, multi-image thing, which is why Photoshop is saying, hey, there's a bunch of content here. What do you want me to edit?
Right.
So we could either click one of these, open them.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that image.
Right. And then, for example, we would just want to change it to black and white. You want it to be more monochromatic. You can do that. And then you would save that as a PSD file. save it with the layers too. And then you would essentially link that image to the PSD file that you just created. So we link in the links tab. And you can find the one you just created and then click open. Okay. And so this is essentially a working document in Photoshop that you can go back to and keep editing. So for example, if we change that back to, change something else that, to look a little funky, and then save and relink, it will update the way you did in Photoshop. So that's just some post-production that you can do on images especially, but you can do that with plans and elevations as well.
And I believe let's try something else here too, because this is really powerful. This is very helpful. So now we have a Photoshop file, which gives us the edit capability of Photoshop. And if we go back through and right click on that linked, well, let's right click on the frame actually. And let's do that same thing, edit. Yep. Which is then going to open that Photoshop file. Whether or not Photoshop is open or you have Photoshop set as your default PSD, it should be set. Mm-hmm. So here, let's make a very drastic change. What should we do? Let's do a photo filter and make it orange. Sure. There we go.
All right.
And then hit save, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now actually, I think if we go back to InDesign, let's see if this works. It updates automatically.
Great, yeah.
And that's because we are within the Adobe infrastructure, right? We're using a combination of Photoshop and InDesign, and Adobe knows that sometimes you need to be in a layout program and sometimes you need to be in a photo editing program.
Right, yeah. And this is especially useful when, when you're doing some last minute changes to your portfolio, and if in that instance you do have all of these images linked to PSD files, it's going to be really efficient to quickly update them. So there we have it, our draft template. And this would be essentially for a single project that is on one spread. But if you would like to show more of that project and have it on 2 different spreads, you could use a layout that is like this. So for example, if this is one project on 2 spreads, you would have some brief information with an axon view, plan renders, and then you could have some detailed drawings on the next page if you do want to show a little more to that project and something that you're really proud of. And so that is just an example of, if you do want to take it to the next level and show a little more information, you could have it on 2 spreads. And these are just a few more layouts of, if you are showing design process, what would that look like? This is a potential layout you could use. Another one where you probably just have images with some descriptions below them, and then you could even have a full bleed, because full bleeds are really effective layouts as well. And I think that is about it.
I have a bonus content thing I would love to show, and I think it might also be useful for us to talk a little bit about color in the time we have left.
Yeah, definitely. So going back to our test portfolio file, if we go to Window and Color here, you will be led to Adobe Color Themes and a few other options. So if you click on Adobe Color Themes, there's an inbuilt library of colors that you can use, which is really helpful when you just quickly want to pick a color scheme and move on. If you go to Explore here, there's a set of color themes that you can pick. For example, you like eucalyptus, you can go with that. So click to edit, it'll show all the different swatches in that color theme. And then you can name it, you know, what, again, naming is very important. So we can call it test color swatch. Save it to your library, yes. And then that will show up in My Themes. There it is. And so now we have our test color swatch, and then we can go ahead and go back to the color window, color, and go to swatches, and this will open up your swatches window. I think, I'm sorry, just open up the color window as well. Typically, it should show all your swatches here. I did that last time.
Yeah, I think what's happening here, I don't know if we can click and drag from my colors or use them. What's happening here is we are accessing two different color data things. One is our online Adobe color library, which is utilized by logging in to your Adobe thing.
Right.
And then the other one is what is being used by InDesign in its own infrastructure. Like what colors does it understand need to be used? Yeah, I know what's going on, but for some reason it's not working right now.
Yeah. So now that we have our test color swatch here under My Themes, you go these three little dots here and then just say Add to Swatches. And then go back to Window, Color, and then open up your swatches dialog. And then that should show up right there. You have your test swatches and your colors under the swatches dialog. And that could really be your guideline, you know, for example, if you would like to edit the color of this text, go to Fill here, and you would have your test color swatch ready to use. Click on that. That will give you really beautiful green color text. And you know, that could really work with everything that you're using, your project name. You could even have strokes around your images that could be the same color if that is part of your concept. So yeah, that is a really effective way to use color themes, and it keeps it all in one place for you in your swatches dialog.
And I mean, color theory and color decisions are just incredible. The amount of detail and concern, right?
Right.
I mean, if you've ever noticed like products, like a bag of chips has like a series of color things on it so that they can scan every bag and make sure the colors are the right color.
Yeah.
Let's do one more thing here, which is perhaps a little different method of laying out a page. Now, project B, let's go to that page. And then also, can we open up your collection of images for project B? Okay, so here we have just this whole range of different images. And maybe I want to organize them in a very specific way. Some have highlights, some are more important, or maybe they're all important. Actually, it looks like A1, A2, A3, there's a collection of renderings here, right, that could all be organized on a grid.
Right.
So going back to InDesign, on that blank page, this is actually perfect. If we start the rectangle frame tool, and if we click and drag from the top left margin over to the right margin, but don't let it go, just drag your cursor over to the bottom right margin. Now here, what you've done is you've let go and you've created the frame. So do that one more time, but don't let go of your left mouse button as you drag it out.
Okay.
And before you let go, hit your arrow keys on your keyboard.
Let go.
All right, delete both of those. Try this one more time.
Okay.
So click drag.
Yeah.
Now hit the right or top arrow. There you go.
Yes.
And keep hitting the right arrow key on your keyboard and the top arrow key on your keyboard.
Wow, this is incredible.
And what's actually happening here is when you started the document, you defined what's called a gutter.
Mhm.
The gutter definition, which is similar to a bleed, a margin, a slug, all these different terms, will establish the relationship between elements, framing elements in InDesign. And it's going to use that gutter to define that spacing. And now if you let go or click and accept that, you have a series of frames that are perfectly orientated on that page.
Wow, this is incredible. Wow, it's like a game changer.
And what we'll also do really quickly here as a demonstration is I want to put all of those images from that you've collected into those elements. But before we do that, I want to make sure the images fit perfectly in those frames based on a definition. So back in InDesign, let's select all the frames using a marquee selector, right click on them, and go to fitting. But in fitting, we will hit fitting, frame fitting options. And now I will click that and let's see, Dyuthi, what do you think? Do you want it, what makes sense to you?
Fit content to frame.
Or fit content to frame proportionally?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then also notice the align from.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I think I would want that to align from the center point.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, so then let's hit OK.
Okay.
And what we've done is those framing elements now have a fitting definition to them. So now without anything selected, we'll deselect everything. We'll use the place command. And we will load all of the content from Project B folder.
Oh, just directly from the folder?
I think you have to go into the folder and then shift select. Yep, exactly. And then if we just don't do show import options, actually don't do that.
Yeah.
And now it's going to load all of those into the queue or the hopper or whatever you want to call it. And then we can just start clicking on each of those things. And it's not going to work perfectly, but it is a pretty efficient way to get elements into a grid when you're less concerned about the hierarchy of elements on a page and more concerned about showing individual things. And the fitting worked a little bit weird than what I wanted, but you can always go back in and change it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, this is a really great tool. Yeah, it saves you a lot of time, especially with the grids, and you don't really need to create those grids like we did before. Okay.
It also just it helps you get content
Yeah.
in InDesign really quickly.
Yeah.
Like maybe you don't care about the 4 images in the top right, or maybe that image, the axon kind of exploded tiered axon needs to be moved over to the right side of the page.
Yeah. I should have probably just copied that and left the frame. I'll probably just import like a few more.
Yep. For some reason that did not import
Yeah,
those slides like I thought it was going to.
Oh, okay.
There it goes.
Works now.
Yeah, and there's probably stuff we could fix on that, but that's a decent amount of content.
Yeah, looks great. Yeah, I wish I'd known more about it. I'm just like blown away.
Well, is there anything else you wanted to show with InDesign, or going back to that PDF workflow thing, or?
Yes, so we went through all of the different processes. We started off with curating and then drew out our template, inputted our projects into InDesign. We also revised and refined a little bit with the post-production. And so now it's really up to you, moving forward, reviewing with people, getting feedback, and then deciding if it's a professional portfolio, how to tailor that. But I think we have covered most of the items on this presentation. So
We can wrap up our conversation here. And
right.
well, portfolio design is a lot of work.
It is.
And I'm going to say something, but then I'm going to let you have the last word. The thing I'm going to say, I've said before, which is no amount of portfolio design will make bad work look better.
Yeah.
And many times our ability to use programs like InDesign is our ability to reflect on the work we've done.
Mhm.
And we also want to do good design in a way that showcases these spaces. So for everyone, be cautious of when you're adding design to a portfolio that distracts from the work you've done. Also know that designing your portfolio is important, but you should also focus on the work.
Yeah, absolutely. And designing your portfolio is essentially another project, right? It is just like a typical design project where you would start with your concept, tell your story, decide how the process should be, and eventually present it. So think of it like that. And hopefully these tools are helpful to you because they are very similar to how we typically start a design project, and not as structured as it should be. So yeah, and let your personality shine through.
I completely agree. Thank you, Dyuthi.
Great. Thank you, Peter.